What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton has been truly blown away by Ferrari's potential ahead of the Chinese Grand Prix, but not exactly for the reason everyone imagines? Because what he has discovered inside the SF26 could completely change Ferrari's narrative this season. For years, the Maranello team has been synonymous with unfulfilled promises, cars that are fast on a lap but inconsistent in the race, and opportunities that slip away at key moments. However, something has changed at the start of the championship. The data, the feelings within the team, and Hamilton's own words point to a reality that few expected. Ferrari could have finally built a technical base capable of truly fighting with the best. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now. If we continue, Lewis Hamilton, for his part, experienced a more complicated weekend in qualifying, which forced him to start the race from a less favorable position. However, during the Grand Prix, he managed to climb back to fourth position thanks to a very consistent race pace. That performance during the race was precisely one of the elements that caught his attention the most. In his own words, the car had more potential than it seemed to show on Saturday. And when a driver with Hamilton's experience makes those kinds of comments, everyone in the paddock pays attention. For Hamilton, what was really shocking was not simply the result in Australia, but the feeling that the car still has room for improvement. During the first weekends of a season with new regulations, teams often discover important limitations in their aerodynamic concepts or in the interaction between the different car systems. But in the case of Ferrari, the first internal evaluations indicate that the SF26 works quite consistently in different scenarios. That means that the improvements the team plans to introduce in upcoming races could have a very significant cumulative effect. And this is where the Chinese Grand Prix comes into play. Shanghai is a circuit that historically tests several key aspects of a car's performance. Long straights where energy efficiency is essential, long corners that require aerodynamic stability, and tire management that can make enormous differences between teams. If Ferrari has really solved some of the structural problems that it had in previous seasons, China could become one of the first opportunities to demonstrate that this car is not only competitive in specific circumstances, but that it can stay consistently close to the leaders. Within the team, there is an interesting mix of caution and optimism. No one at Maranello is yet proclaiming that Ferrari can directly fight for victories every weekend, especially with Mercedes showing such a strong level at the start of the championship. But at the same time, there is a feeling that SF26 has changed the direction of the project. And that feeling has been reinforced by Hamilton's reaction, who has made it clear that the car's potential has surprised him. When a driver who has won multiple world championships talks about a car with that level of contained enthusiasm, it's because he's really seeing something different inside the garage. Therefore, the Chinese Grand Prix is not simply the next race on the calendar for Ferrari. It is a much more important test. It is the moment in which the team can confirm if the positive sensations from Australia and the pre-season tests were just a good start, or if we are really facing the beginning of a season in which Ferrari can once again be a real threat at the top of the grid. But if there was something that really shocked Lewis Hamilton when analyzing the Ferrari SF26, it was discovering that the car's real potential has not yet been fully seen on the track. And this is something that has also been discussed quite cautiously within the team itself. Because it's one thing to finish close to the leaders in a race, and quite another to have the feeling that the car still has room to go faster. And according to what Hamilton has been able to evaluate after the first weekend of the season, Ferrari could be in that situation. During the Australian Grand Prix, the final result showed Ferrari as the second most competitive team behind Mercedes, but the internal reading of the performance was much more interesting than what the track positions reflected. In qualifying, the SF26 still seems to have difficulty extracting the last tenth that Mercedes does when it comes to a perfect lap. That small deficit in qualifying mode was what conditioned part of the weekend, especially in the case of Hamilton, who could not get into the ideal starting position. However, when the race started and the cars got into real racing rhythm, Ferrari began to show a completely different side. The pace in long runs was probably the clearest sign of that hidden potential. Throughout the race stints, both Hamilton and Leclerc were able to maintain very stable times lap after lap, something that had historically been one of Ferrari's big problems. In previous seasons, the Maranello car often lost performance as the stint progressed, especially when the tires began to degrade. But in Australia, the opposite was true. The SF26 seemed to gain consistency as the race progressed, allowing the drivers to stay within the pace range of the Mercedes for much of the Grand Prix. That is precisely what caught Hamilton's attention the most. The Briton has driven cars capable of dominating races thanks to their sustained pace, and he immediately recognizes when a car has that capacity. According to his impressions, the Ferrari was not only competitive at certain moments of the race, but also showed a balance that allowed it to manage tires, energy, and pace much more efficiently than he expected. In other words, the car did not depend on very specific conditions to function, something that in Formula One makes a huge difference over the course of a season. Another aspect that surprised the Brit was the behavior of the car on the straight, especially taking into account the new hybrid regulations of 2026. With the significant increase in the electrical component in power delivery, the way in which each team manages the recovery and deployment of energy can completely change the performance of the car in certain areas of the circuit. Ferrari seems to have achieved a very efficient system in this regard. The SF26 can consistently deploy electric power on long straights without compromising too much recovery in braking zones, allowing it to maintain a competitive speed throughout the lap. This factor could be especially important at the Chinese Grand Prix. The Shanghai circuit combines several long straights with wide radius corners that require aerodynamic stability and very precise use of hybrid power. If the Ferrari really is as energy efficient as the initial data suggests, that circuit could play to some of its natural strengths. And this is something that is also being analyzed very carefully within the team before the weekend. However, Hamilton has also been very clear on another fundamental point. Ferrari is still not at the level of Mercedes in all aspects. The Germans have started the season showing an impressive ability to maximize car performance in qualifying, allowing them to control many races from pole position. That initial advantage on the grid continues to be a key factor. So while Ferrari's race pace has been promising, the team knows it needs to improve its one-lap performance if it wants to turn that potential into real victories. Still, what has shocked Hamilton is not simply that Ferrari is close to Mercedes. What has really surprised him is the feeling that the car has a very clear base on which to work. For many years, Ferrari has made improvements without solving structural problems with the car concept. But this time the perception is different. The SF26 seems like a coherent project, a car that responds logically to changes, and that allows engineers to identify more clearly where they can find more performance. That completely changes the team's outlook for the upcoming races. If Ferrari manages to slightly improve its qualifying performance and maintain the solid pace it has shown in the race, then the gap to Mercedes could close much faster than many expected at the start of the championship. And in that context, the Chinese Grand Prix becomes a very interesting opportunity to see if Hamilton's impressions were justified. Because if the SF26 once again shows that balance between pace, energy efficiency, and tire management in Shanghai, then Ferrari will not only arrive in China as Mercedes' main pursuer, it could begin to consolidate itself as the only team capable of really putting the leaders under pressure at this start of the season. The Chinese Grand Prix now appears as a particularly revealing test for Ferrari because the Shanghai circuit has characteristics that can expose both the real strengths and weaknesses of a car. Unlike other layouts on the calendar, here it is not enough to have a fast car in a single type of corner or with a specific configuration. Shanghai combines extremely long straights, very strong braking zones, and long, constant radius corners that test the car's aerodynamic balance and energy management throughout the lap. And precisely for this reason, within Ferrari there is enormous curiosity to see how the SF26 will behave in this scenario. In short, Ferrari arrives at the Chinese Grand Prix in a position that completely changes the narrative that surrounded the team in recent years. The SF26 does not seem to be simply a competitive car at specific moments, but rather a car with a solid base that allows us to think about real development throughout the season. And that is exactly what has left Lewis Hamilton shocked. It's not just about finishing close to the leaders in Australia, but the internal feeling that the car still has room to show more performance. When a driver with his experience perceives that potential in a project, it means that the team could be facing something much more important than a good start to the season. The Shanghai circuit will now be the perfect setting to see if these sensations are really as promising as they seem. If Ferrari manages to maintain the balance it has shown in race pace, take advantage of its energy efficiency on the long straights, and slightly improve its performance in qualifying, then the gap with Mercedes could begin to close faster than many expected. And in that context, the Chinese Grand Prix will not be simply another race on the calendar, but a key opportunity to confirm that Ferrari has finally found the right path in this new technical era. Because if the SF26 proves solid again on a circuit as demanding as Shanghai, then the message will be clear to the entire paddock. Ferrari has not only returned to being close to the best, it could be building the car that allows it to truly fight for big results throughout the season. And if that happens, the impact that Hamilton felt upon discovering the true potential of the Ferrari will not just be an initial impression, but the first indication that Maranello is ready to fight again at the top of Formula One. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.